I'm Margaret Thompson, 53 years old, and I'm standing in my bathroom mirror staring at what used to be my beautiful silver hair. Chunks are missing, uneven lengths stick out at odd angles, and I can see my scalp through the bald spots. My hands shake as I touch the butchered mess that my daughter-in-law Brittany called a makeover. But it's my own son Derek's words that keep echoing in my head. You needed a lesson, Mom. As I look at my reflection, I realize this wasn't just about hair. This was war. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Trust me, what happened next will absolutely shock you, so let's get started with how this nightmare began. 24 hours earlier, I was hosting what I thought would be a lovely family dinner at my home in Dallas. I had spent the afternoon preparing Derek's favorite pot roast, setting my best china on the dining room table, and arranging fresh flowers from my garden. At 53, I took pride in maintaining the same house where my late husband Robert and I had raised our 3 children. The walls held decades of memories, family photos spanning from baby pictures to graduation ceremonies, and I cherished every moment our family spent together under this roof. Derek arrived first with Brittany, his wife of 2 years. At 28, Derek had grown into a successful lawyer at one of Dallas's most prestigious firms, though I sometimes worried he lacked the backbone his father had possessed. Brittany, 26 and perpetually attached to her phone, made her living as what she called an influencer, with 50,000 followers on social media. She documented everything from her morning smoothies to her designer handbags, constantly posing and photographing herself throughout our family gatherings. I had always found her behavior peculiar, but I tried to be welcoming for Derek's sake. My daughter Emma arrived shortly after, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her medical residency. At 24, she possessed the same determination and compassion that had made me successful as a school principal for 25 years. Emma had always been my most perceptive child, often catching nuances in situations that others missed. James, my youngest at 22, bounded through the door with his typical college senior energy, backpack slung over his shoulder and textbooks spilling out. He had his father's easy laugh and my stubborn streak, a combination that sometimes got him into trouble but always made family dinners interesting. The conversation flowed easily during the first course, with Emma sharing stories from the emergency room and James excitedly describing his upcoming graduation. Derek discussed a high-profile case his firm had just won, and even Brittany seemed engaged, though she paused frequently to check her phone and adjust her appearance for impromptu selfies. I felt content watching my children together, grateful that despite their busy lives, they still made time for these family gatherings that meant so much to me. It was during dessert that Brittany made her suggestion. She had been studying me with an intensity that made me somewhat uncomfortable, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the rim of her wine glass as her blue eyes assessed my appearance with the critical gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating aesthetics for social media. Maggie, she said with what seemed like genuine concern, I've been thinking about Emma's wedding next month. You're going to be in so many photos, and I just wonder if we shouldn't update your look a little bit. I touched my shoulder-length silver hair self-consciously. Robert had always loved its natural wave and shine, and I had maintained the same style for years because it was classic and elegant. What do you mean, dear? I asked, though something in Brittany's tone made me wary. Well, you know how important wedding photos are. They're forever. And your hair, it's just so, she paused dramatically, outdated. I mean, that style screams 1990, not 2024. As someone who works in beauty and fashion, I feel like I should help family look their best. I could give you a modern cut tomorrow morning, something that would photograph beautifully and take years off your appearance. Derek immediately chimed in with enthusiastic support for his wife's suggestion. Mom, Brittany has such a great eye for this stuff. You should see how many compliments she gets on her hair. She could totally help you look more contemporary. His eager endorsement stung more than Brittany's criticism because it came from my own son, the boy I had raised to be thoughtful and considerate. I noticed Emma's concerned glance across the table and James shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but neither of them spoke up. The silence stretched awkwardly as I considered the proposal. Part of me bristled at the implication that my appearance needed fixing, but another part wondered if perhaps they were right. Maybe I had become too set in my ways, too resistant to change. Emma's wedding was indeed important, and if looking more modern would help the photos turn out better, perhaps I should be open to the suggestion. I don't know, I said hesitantly. I've had this style for so long. Maybe we could just discuss some subtle changes? Brittany's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine excitement. Oh, absolutely. Nothing dramatic, just a trim and some modern styling. I brought my professional equipment in the car because I thought you might be interested. We could do it tomorrow morning when the light is perfect. I promise you'll love the results. The fact that she had brought her equipment without even knowing if I would agree should have been a warning sign, but I was touched by what seemed like thoughtful preparation. Derek squeezed my hand across the table, his expression warm and encouraging. Come on, Mom. Let Brittany work her magic. You trust us, don't you? That question settled it for me. Of course I trusted my son. I had raised him to be honest and caring, and if he thought this would be beneficial, then surely it would be. All right, I agreed, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. Just a trim and some styling. Nothing too dramatic. Brittany clapped her hands together with apparent delight, already pulling out her phone to take notes about the plan. This is going to be amazing, Maggie. You're going to look absolutely stunning at Emma's wedding. Everyone will be asking who did your hair. As the evening wound down and my children prepared to leave, I walked them to the door with a lightness in my step. Emma lingered behind the others, her expression troubled. Mom, are you sure about this? I think your hair looks beautiful the way it is. I hugged her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with hospital antiseptic. Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just a little update. Brittany knows what she's doing. But as Emma pulled away, I caught something in her eyes that looked almost like fear. Just, be careful, okay? I dismissed her concern with a laugh. It's just hair, honey. What's the worst that could happen? Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror running a brush through my silver waves. Soon this familiar routine would change, and while the thought made me slightly nervous, I was also curious about how different I might look. I had spent so many years focused on being a stable, consistent presence in my children's lives that perhaps it was time to embrace something new. As I drifted off to sleep, I imagined Derek's proud smile when he saw my updated appearance, never suspecting that what Brittany had planned would destroy far more than just my hair. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through my kitchen windows as I prepared coffee and pastries for Brittany's visit. I had chosen to wear a simple blue blouse that I could easily wash if any hair products spilled, and I tied a silk scarf around my neck to protect my clothing. At precisely 9 o'clock, Brittany arrived carrying what appeared to be a professional styling kit, complete with multiple sets of scissors, electric clippers, bottles of various hair products, and a black cape that she immediately draped around my shoulders. Good morning, gorgeous. She chirped, her demeanor bright and energetic as she set up her equipment on my kitchen counter. Are you ready for your transformation? I've been thinking about this all night, and I have the perfect vision for you. Something really modern and edgy that will make you look years younger. The word, edgy, sent a small shiver of concern through me, but I reminded myself that I had agreed to trust her judgment. I hope you remember that I want something conservative, I said, settling into the chair she had positioned in front of my hallway mirror. Just a trim and some updated styling. Brittany's laugh tinkled like wind chimes as she sectioned my hair with clips, her movements quick and confident. Of course, Maggie. Trust me, I'm a professional. I know exactly what will look best on you. She began by wetting my hair with a spray bottle, combing it straight down past my shoulders. Wow, you really do have a lot of hair. This is going to be such a dramatic improvement. The first snip of her scissors took off nearly 6 inches from the back, and I gasped audibly as I watched the long strands fall to the floor. That seems like quite a lot, I said, my voice rising with anxiety as I watched years of careful growth disappear in moments. Oh, don't worry about that, Brittany replied dismissively, moving to the left side of my head with swift, aggressive cuts. I need to get rid of all this old, damaged hair before I can create the new style. You'll see, this is going to look amazing. But as she continued cutting, her movements became increasingly erratic and careless. Each section she trimmed seemed to be shorter than the last, and when she moved to the right side of my head, I noticed that it didn't match the left at all. When I pointed this out, she made an exaggerated frustrated sound and began cutting even more aggressively. Oops, she said with theatrical concern, I think I need to even this out. You moved your head a little bit, which threw off my measurements. Her tone carried a hint of accusation that made me feel guilty for something I wasn't even sure I had done. I sat absolutely still as she continued cutting, watching in growing horror as my beautiful silver hair disappeared chunk by chunk. What remained was uneven and choppy, with some sections barely 2 inches long while others hung in strange, disconnected pieces. Brittany, I said, my voice shaking, this doesn't look right at all. I know, she replied, wielding her scissors with what seemed like vindictive enthusiasm. This side is still too long. I need to match it to the other side. She began cutting even more hair from the right, creating an asymmetrical mess that bore no resemblance to any recognizable hairstyle. The front door opened and I heard Derek's familiar footsteps in the hallway. Relief flooded through me because surely he would see what was happening and intervene. How's it going in here? He called out cheerfully as he rounded the corner and saw my reflection in the mirror. I expected shock, concern, immediate action to stop this disaster. Instead, Derek's face remained completely neutral as he took in my butchered appearance. Looking good, Mom, he said with what sounded like satisfaction rather than sympathy. Brittany really knows what she's doing. My heart sank as I realized that this calm reaction meant Derek had known exactly what would happen. This wasn't an accident or a mistake in judgment. This was intentional, planned, coordinated between my son and his wife to humiliate me in my own home. Brittany stepped back from her work with an exaggerated sigh of frustration, her blue eyes wide with fake tears that didn't fool me for a second. I'm so sorry, Maggie. You kept moving around, and it made it really difficult to get clean lines. I think maybe I nicked a little too much here. She gestured vaguely at the bald patches now visible on both sides of my head where she had cut so short that my scalp showed through. Moving around? I repeated incredulously. I've been sitting perfectly still this entire time. Derek stepped forward with what he probably thought was a reasonable expression, but his eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. Mom, you need to calm down. These things happen when people don't cooperate during haircuts. Brittany was doing you a favor. The word, favor, hit me like a physical blow. Looking at my destroyed reflection, at my son's unsympathetic face, at Brittany's barely concealed smirk, I finally understood that this had been planned from the beginning. The professional equipment brought without invitation, Derek's immediate enthusiastic support, his convenient appearance during the worst of the damage, none of it was coincidental. Brittany wiped her fake tears with the back of her hand, her voice taking on a tone of helpful suggestion. You know, Maggie, at this point, maybe you should just shave it all off and start over. Sometimes that's the best option when a cut goes wrong like this. The casual cruelty of her suggestion, delivered with such apparent innocence, revealed the depth of her malice. This wasn't about helping me look better for Emma's wedding. This wasn't about updating my style or taking years off my appearance. This was about power, control, and humiliation, orchestrated by someone who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. Derek nodded in agreement with his wife's suggestion, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made me feel like a scolded child rather than the woman who had raised him. You needed a lesson, Mom. You've always been too controlling, too set in your ways. Maybe this will teach you to be more flexible and listen to other people's advice. The words, you needed a lesson, echoed in my mind as I stared at my reflection. My beautiful silver hair, which Robert had loved to run his fingers through, which had been my crown and my pride for decades, was gone. In its place was a choppy, uneven disaster that made me look like I had been attacked rather than styled. Bald spots gleamed under the hallway lights, and the remaining chunks of hair stuck out at odd angles that no amount of styling could fix. But it was the realization that my own son had orchestrated this humiliation that truly broke my heart. The boy I had raised to be kind and thoughtful had grown into a man who could watch his mother's dignity being destroyed and call it a lesson she needed to learn. As Brittany packed up her equipment with exaggerated efficiency, making comments about how some people just aren't ready for change, I understood that this wasn't really about hair at all. This was about someone trying to break my spirit, to make me doubt myself, to strip away my confidence and self-respect along with my hair. As they prepared to leave, Derek paused at the door with what might have been an attempt at reconciliation. "I hope you understand why this was necessary, Mom. Sometimes people need a wake-up call to realize they can't control everyone around them." I stood in my hallway, still wearing the black cape that now felt more like a shroud, watching my son and daughter-in-law walk away from the destruction they had created. The house felt suddenly enormous and empty around me, filled with the echoes of my own naivety and the bitter taste of betrayal. In the mirror, a stranger stared back at me, someone vulnerable and damaged and aged beyond her years. But as the shock began to wear off and anger started to take its place, I realized that Derek was wrong about one thing. This wasn't going to teach me to be more flexible or less controlling. This was going to teach me exactly who I could trust and who I needed to protect myself from. And as I looked at my destroyed reflection one more time before covering the mirror with a towel, I made a silent promise that this lesson would go both ways. The immediate aftermath of what I now called the butchery left me housebound and humiliated. I canceled my weekly bridge club, my volunteer commitment at the literacy center, and my standing hair appointment that I had kept for 15 years. The thought of facing anyone who knew me, of seeing pity or shock in their eyes, was unbearable. I ordered a selection of scarves online and learned to tie them in ways that might hide the worst of the damage, but nothing could disguise the fact that I looked like someone who had been through a traumatic experience. Emma arrived at my house within hours of receiving my tearful phone call, her medical training immediately taking over as she assessed the situation with professional calm. "Mom, this isn't just a bad haircut," she said, gently examining the uneven patches and bald spots. "This is deliberate damage. No one with any training would do this accidentally." Her clinical assessment confirmed what I already knew in my heart, but hearing it spoken aloud by my intelligent, educated daughter gave me the validation I desperately needed. James arrived shortly after Emma, and his reaction was far less controlled. His face flushed with anger as he took in my appearance, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I'm going to kill Derek," he said through gritted teeth. "How could he let this happen to you? How could he participate in this?" "He didn't just let it happen," I told them both, my voice steadier now that my children were with me. "He planned it. This was his idea of teaching me a lesson for being too controlling." Emma's expression shifted from sympathy to fury, her usually gentle demeanor hardening with protective rage. "What kind of lesson involves humiliating your own mother? What kind of man watches someone destroy his mother's appearance and calls it necessary?" That afternoon, while Emma helped me research wigs and James paced my living room making angry phone calls to Derek that went unanswered, I began my own investigation. Years of being a school principal had taught me that knowledge was power, and that the best way to handle bullies was to understand exactly who you were dealing with. I opened my laptop and began researching everything I could find about Brittany Miller, starting with her social media presence and working backward through public records, previous addresses, and any digital footprints she might have left. What I discovered was illuminating and disturbing in equal measure. Brittany's Instagram account, while boasting 50,000 followers, showed clear signs of artificial inflation. Her engagement rates were suspiciously low for someone with that many followers, and many of her comments came from accounts with generic usernames and no profile pictures, clear indicators of purchased bot interactions. Her sponsorship posts for beauty products and lifestyle brands were frequent but from smaller, less reputable companies than someone with genuine influence would typically partner with. More concerning was what I found when I dug deeper into her background. Public records showed that her real name was actually Bethany Miller, and she was from a small town in Alabama rather than the cosmopolitan background she claimed. Her educational credentials, which included references to attending a prestigious university in California, couldn't be verified through any alumni databases or graduation records. Employment history before her marriage to Derek was sparse and inconsistent, with gaps that suggested she had either been unemployed for extended periods or working in jobs she preferred not to document. Susan Martinez, my friend from my teaching days who had retired from the police force 5 years earlier, proved invaluable in this research phase. When I called her and explained the situation, her response was immediate and fierce. "That little witch did what to your hair? Oh honey, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Send me everything you've found so far." Susan's investigative skills, honed by decades of detective work, quickly uncovered information that I would never have been able to access on my own. Within 2 days, she had compiled a comprehensive background report on Brittany that revealed a pattern of deceptive behavior stretching back years. Financial records showed significant credit card debt that Derek almost certainly knew nothing about. Previous addresses included a brief marriage to a wealthy older man in Arizona that had ended in divorce under circumstances involving accusations of theft and financial manipulation. "This girl is a professional con artist," Susan told me over coffee in my kitchen, her weathered hands spreading documents across my table like a detective building a case. "She targets men with money and family connections, worms her way into their lives, and then systematically destroys anyone who might threaten her position. You're not her first victim, Maggie. You're just her most recent one." Armed with this knowledge, I began my first tentative steps toward fighting back. I started by contacting several of the companies that sponsored Brittany's social media content, expressing concerns as a community member about their brand being associated with someone who engaged in elder abuse. I was careful to present myself as a worried neighbor rather than the victim, and I provided photographic evidence of my destroyed hair along with documentation of Brittany's fraudulent follower count. The response was swift and decisive. 3 companies immediately terminated their sponsorship agreements with Brittany, citing violations of their brand values and community standards. Her income, which Derek had always assumed was substantial, took an immediate hit that would undoubtedly cause stress in their household finances. Meanwhile, Derek's attempts to contact me became increasingly aggressive and demanding. He left voicemail messages insisting that I was overreacting, and that I needed to apologize to Brittany for making such a big deal about what he continued to characterize as an innocent mistake. His tone carried the entitled expectation that I would simply accept the humiliation and move on, the same way I had always smoothed over conflicts to maintain family harmony. But the days of my automatically deferring to keep peace were over. When Derek finally showed up at my house unannounced, demanding entry and an explanation for why I was being so dramatic, I met him at the door wearing one of my new scarves and a steel in my voice that he had never heard before. "You want to talk about overreacting, Derek?" I said calmly. "Let's talk about a grown man who thinks it's appropriate to collaborate in humiliating his own mother. Let's talk about someone so weak and manipulated that he can't see when he's being used as a weapon against his own family." His face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but for the first time in years, I didn't care about his emotional comfort. "You don't know what you're talking about, Mom. Brittany loves this family. She was trying to help you. Help me by destroying my hair and then blaming me for moving? Help me by suggesting I shave my head when she was finished butchering what was left. That's your definition of help?" Derek's certainty wavered slightly, but his loyalty to his wife remained firm. "You're twisting what happened. It was just a haircut that went wrong. These things happen." "No, Derek," I said with quiet finality. "Accidents happen. This was intentional cruelty, and the fact that you can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you've become." As Derek stormed away from my house that evening, I realized that this confrontation had clarified something important for me. I wasn't just fighting to restore my hair or my dignity. I was fighting for the right to exist in my own family without being diminished, controlled, or sacrificed for someone else's satisfaction. And as I looked at myself in the mirror that night, wearing the beautiful silver wig I had purchased to replace what had been stolen from me, I made a promise that this fight was just beginning. The war that Brittany had started was about to become very expensive for her, and Derek was going to learn exactly what kind of lesson his mother was capable of teaching when pushed too far. Susan's investigative skills proved even more valuable than I had initially hoped. Within a week of our first meeting, she had uncovered a trail of deception that painted Brittany as someone far more dangerous and calculating than I had imagined. We met at a small cafe across town where no one would recognize us, Susan arriving with a thick folder that she placed carefully on the table between us. "Maggie, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, but you need to know exactly who your family is dealing with," Susan said, her voice carrying the serious tone she had used when briefing officers about dangerous criminals. "Bethany Miller, and that is her real name, by the way, has a history of targeting families exactly like yours." The documents Susan spread before me painted a picture of systematic manipulation and financial exploitation. Brittany's previous marriage in Arizona had lasted exactly long enough for her to establish community property rights before the relationship imploded amid accusations that she had been siphoning money from her husband's business accounts. The divorce proceedings included restraining orders and criminal complaints that had ultimately been dropped when Brittany agreed to leave the state permanently. Her ex-husband, Martin Crawford, was 62 when they married, Susan explained, pointing to court documents. Wealthy widower, 2 adult children who lived out of state. Sound familiar? She isolated him from his family, convinced him his children were trying to take advantage of him, and nearly succeeded in getting him to change his will before his daughter discovered what was happening. The parallels to my own situation were chilling and undeniable. Brittany had a clear pattern of behavior. Identify vulnerable men with assets and family connections, create conflict between the target and his existing support system, position herself as the only trustworthy person in his life, and then systematically drain his resources while destroying his relationships with anyone who might interfere. Financial records that Susan had obtained through her law enforcement contacts revealed even more disturbing information. Brittany had accumulated massive credit card debt in Derek's name, purchases that included luxury handbags, expensive cosmetics, and jewelry that she claimed were business expenses for her influencer career. Derek's bank statements showed regular transfers to accounts that Brittany controlled, money that was supposedly for investment opportunities, and business ventures that existed only in her imagination. "Your son has no idea how deep in debt she's put him," Susan told me grimly. "Based on what I can see here, she's spent nearly $100,000 in the past year alone. His savings account has been completely drained, and she's maxed out every credit line he has." The educational credentials that Brittany claimed were entirely fabricated. She had never attended the University of Southern California, despite having a diploma hanging in Derek and Brittany's apartment. She had never worked for the marketing firms she listed on her resume. Her entire professional background was a carefully constructed fiction designed to make her appear successful and sophisticated. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Brittany had been estranged from her own family for over 5 years following accusations that she had stolen money from her grandmother's estate. Police reports from Alabama showed a pattern of elder abuse complaints against Bethany Miller, though charges had never been formally filed due to lack of cooperation from the elderly victims who were too ashamed or frightened to pursue prosecution. "This woman is a predator," Susan said bluntly. "She specifically targets families with older parents who have assets, and she uses emotional manipulation and isolation tactics to gain control. The hair incident wasn't random cruelty, Maggie. It was a calculated attack designed to break your confidence and make you doubt yourself." Armed with this information, I began to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about a vindictive daughter-in-law who disliked me. This was about a dangerous individual who had infiltrated my family with the specific intention of exploiting Derek financially while neutralizing anyone who might interfere with her plans. Derek's hostile behavior toward me suddenly made sense when viewed through this lens. Brittany had been working systematically to poison his perception of me, probably from the very beginning of their relationship. Every family gathering where I had expressed concern about their spending, every conversation where I had asked reasonable questions about their plans, every moment of normal parental involvement had been reframed by Brittany as evidence of my controlling and manipulative nature. Susan and I spent the following days documenting everything we had learned, creating a comprehensive file that included financial records, background checks, witness statements from Brittany's previous victims, and photographic evidence of the damage she had done to my hair. We also began reaching out to Derek's professional colleagues and friends, carefully planting seeds of concern about his judgment and decision-making without directly accusing his wife of criminal behavior. The response was immediate and revealing. Partners at Derek's law firm began mentioning their concerns about his recent performance and his increasingly erratic behavior. Friends reported that Derek had become distant and defensive, canceling social commitments and avoiding conversations about his personal life. The isolation that Brittany had imposed on our family extended far beyond just me. She had been systematically cutting Derek off from every source of support and reality checking that might threaten her control. Meanwhile, Brittany's behavior became increasingly desperate as her sponsorship deals continued to disappear and her artificial social media empire began to crumble. Her Instagram posts became more frequent and frantic, filled with oversharing about family drama and passive-aggressive comments about toxic family members who didn't appreciate her efforts to help them. She began making direct attacks on my reputation within our community, spreading rumors that I was suffering from dementia and becoming dangerously unstable. She told neighbors that my family was concerned about my mental health, and that the hair incident had been my own confused attempt to style my hair that had gone wrong when I blamed her for trying to help. But Brittany had made a crucial error in judgment. She didn't understand that I had spent 25 years as a school principal in this community, building relationships and earning respect through decades of dedicated service. When she tried to spread lies about my mental state, she encountered a wall of people who knew me well enough to recognize manipulation when they saw it. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor of 15 years, called me directly after Brittany approached her with concerns about my declining condition. "That little witch actually had the nerve to suggest that you were becoming senile," Mrs. Henderson told me indignantly. "I told her that I'd known you longer than she'd been alive, and that if anyone in that family had mental health problems, it wasn't you." Similar conversations were happening throughout my neighborhood and professional network. Brittany's attempts to destroy my reputation were backfiring spectacularly, instead revealing her own manipulative nature to people who had known and trusted me for years. As the evidence mounted and the truth about Brittany's background became undeniable, I realized that I was no longer fighting just for my own dignity and respect. I was fighting to save my son from a predator who was systematically destroying his life, his finances, and his relationships with everyone who cared about him. Derek might believe he was protecting his wife from his controlling mother, but the reality was far more dangerous and devastating than he could imagine. The time for gentle persuasion and family diplomacy was over. Brittany had made this a war, and now she was going to discover exactly what happened when someone underestimated the determination of a woman who had spent her entire career protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit them. The approaching holidays became a battlefield where Brittany's manipulation tactics reached their most sophisticated and cruel peak. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday, a time when our family gathered in my dining room to share gratitude and create memories. I had hosted every Thanksgiving dinner for the past 30 years, maintaining traditions that stretched back to when Robert was alive and the children were small. The thought of missing this cornerstone of our family life felt like losing another piece of my identity, but I was unprepared for how Brittany would weaponize even this sacred tradition against me. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Derek called to inform me that he and Brittany would be hosting dinner this year at their apartment. His tone was formal and distant, as if he were delivering information to a business associate rather than speaking to his mother. "We think it's time for some new traditions," he said when I expressed surprise at the sudden change. "Brittany has some amazing ideas for updating how we celebrate holidays." The implication was clear. My way of doing things was outdated and unwelcome, just like everything else about me. When I asked about Emma and James, Derek's voice took on a lecturing quality that I barely recognized. "They're welcome to join us if they can be respectful and supportive of our family decisions. But if they're going to take sides and create drama, maybe they should make other plans." Emma's response when I told her about the new arrangement was swift and decisive. "I'm not going anywhere that woman is hosting," she declared, her usually diplomatic nature overridden by protective fury. "And I'm certainly not going to sit at a table where Derek thinks it's appropriate to exclude you from family celebrations." James was even more direct in his condemnation. "This is insane, Mom. How did we get to the point where Derek is choosing that witch over his own family? I'm not playing along with this game." But Brittany's manipulation proved more sophisticated than any of us had anticipated. She began reaching out to Emma and James individually, not to invite them to Thanksgiving, but to express her concern about my mental state and my influence on their decision-making. She called Emma at the hospital during a particularly stressful shift, her voice full of fake worry as she suggested that my obsession with their marriage was becoming unhealthy and destructive. "I'm really worried about your mom," Brittany told Emma in a conversation that Emma immediately reported to me. "She's been saying some really strange things about me, making accusations that don't make any sense. Derek thinks she might be having some kind of breakdown, and I'm afraid that you and James are enabling her instead of getting her the help she needs." When James confronted Derek directly about the exclusion of me from Thanksgiving, Brittany was ready with an even more insidious strategy. She suggested that I had been spreading lies about her to turn the family against Derek, and that my behavior was evidence of the controlling tendencies that had driven Derek to marriage in the first place. "Your mom has never accepted that Derek is an adult who can make his own choices," Brittany told James with perfectly practiced sincerity. "She's been trying to sabotage our marriage from the beginning, and now she's using this hair situation to manipulate you and Emma into taking sides against us." The brilliance of Brittany's approach was its subtle mixture of truth and fiction. I was indeed working to expose her true nature, and I had been gathering evidence against her. But she presented my legitimate investigation as proof of my instability, and my protective actions as evidence of my controlling behavior. For someone who didn't have access to the full picture of her background and manipulations, her version of events could sound plausible. The Thanksgiving confrontation itself was even worse than I had anticipated. Despite my children's decision to boycott Derek's dinner, I decided to attend, hoping that perhaps seeing me in person might remind Derek of who I really was beneath Brittany's distortions. I wore my best dress and my most natural-looking wig, and I brought a homemade pecan pie that had been Derek's favorite since childhood. The moment I walked into their apartment, I could see that Brittany had orchestrated the entire evening as a performance designed to humiliate me. She had invited Derek's colleagues from his law firm along with neighbors from their building, creating an audience for what she had planned. The table was set with expensive china that I recognized as having been purchased with Derek's credit cards, and she had positioned herself as the gracious hostess welcoming guests to her home. When I presented the pecan pie, Brittany accepted it with exaggerated gratitude before immediately expressing concern about its safety. "Oh, how sweet of you, Maggie," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Though I hope you remembered to check the expiration dates on all the ingredients. I know how easy it is to lose track of things like that." The implication that I was too mentally compromised to safely prepare food was delivered with such apparent kindness that anyone who didn't understand the situation would have seen her as thoughtfully caring rather than deliberately cruel. Throughout the dinner, she continued this pattern of public concern mixed with private insults, creating a narrative that positioned her as the patient and loving daughter-in-law dealing with an increasingly difficult mother-in-law. Derek not only failed to defend me but actively participated in the humiliation. When I attempted to correct some of Brittany's more obvious fabrications about our family history, he cut me off with visible irritation. "Mom, please don't make a scene. Brittany knows what she's talking about." The breaking point came when Brittany suggested to the assembled guests that my family was dealing with some challenges related to my mental health, and that they were exploring options for getting me the support I needed. The euphemistic language barely disguised what she was really suggesting, that I was incompetent and required institutional care. Standing in my son's apartment, surrounded by strangers who were witnessing my character assassination, wearing a wig to cover the damage that this woman had done to my hair while my own son nodded approvingly at her lies, I experienced a moment of clarity that cut through all the confusion and self-doubt that Brittany's campaign had created. I was not losing my mind. I was not being controlling or manipulative. I was being systematically destroyed by a predator who had identified me as the primary threat to her exploitation of my son. Every accusation she made against me was actually a description of her own behavior, projected onto me to deflect attention from her crimes. I excused myself from the dinner with dignity and tact, thanking Derek and Brittany for their hospitality and wishing everyone a pleasant evening. But as I drove home through the empty streets, past houses glowing with warm light and filled with families celebrating together, I felt the full weight of what I had lost. Brittany hadn't just isolated me from holiday traditions or turned my son against me. She had succeeded in making me doubt my own perceptions and question my own sanity. She had weaponized my love for my family against me, using my desire to maintain relationships as a tool to facilitate my own destruction. But she had also made a crucial error. By forcing this public confrontation, by making her accusations so obvious and her manipulation so transparent, she had finally shown me exactly who I was fighting and what tactics she was willing to use. The confused, self-doubting woman who had sat in my kitchen chair letting someone destroy her hair was gone. In her place was someone who understood that this wasn't about family dynamics or personality conflicts. This was about survival, and I was done being a victim. The morning after Thanksgiving marked the beginning of what I privately called Operation Restoration. Susan arrived at my house at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying 2 large coffee cups and a manila folder thick with documents that would form the foundation of our systematic counterattack against Brittany's campaign of destruction. "We're done playing defense," Susan announced as she spread photographs, financial records, and legal documents across my kitchen table. "It's time to remind this little predator that she picked the wrong family to mess with." Our strategy was multi-pronged and methodical, designed to address every aspect of Brittany's manipulation while protecting Derek from the immediate financial and legal consequences of his wife's criminal behavior. The first priority was securing my own assets and legal protections to prevent any attempts at declaring me incompetent or gaining access to my resources. I met with Charles Morrison, my attorney and Robert's old friend, to establish an irrevocable trust that would protect my property and finances from any future challenges to my mental competency. Charles had known me for over 20 years, and his assessment of my mental state was thorough and legally binding. "Maggie, you're sharper than most people half your age," he told me after our comprehensive consultation. "If anyone tries to claim you're incompetent, I have 3 hours of recorded testimony that will make them look like fools." We also established power of attorney documents naming Emma and James as my advocates, explicitly excluding Derek from any decision-making authority regarding my care or finances until such time as he could demonstrate that he was no longer under undue influence. The legal language was carefully crafted to protect Derek's inheritance while preventing Brittany from accessing it through manipulation or coercion. The second phase of our plan involved confronting Derek with the evidence of Brittany's true background, but we had to approach this delicately. Susan's experience with manipulation victims had taught her that direct confrontation often backfired, causing the victim to defend their abuser more fiercely rather than recognizing the truth. Instead, we arranged for Derek to accidentally discover some of the evidence himself. Susan used her contacts to ensure that Derek's law firm received an anonymous tip about potential financial irregularities that warranted investigation. When Derek's partners suggested that he undergo a routine financial audit to protect the firm from liability, the massive debt and fraudulent transactions became impossible to hide. Derek's reaction when he discovered the extent of Brittany's spending was exactly what we had hoped for but heartbreaking to witness. Emma reported that he had called her in the middle of the night, his voice shaking with panic as he realized that his savings, his credit, and his financial future had been systematically destroyed. "She told me these were business investments," he said through tears that Emma could hear over the phone. "She had spreadsheets and projections and explanations for everything. I thought she was building something that would benefit both of us." But when Emma tried to discuss the possibility that Brittany had been deliberately deceiving him, Derek's defenses immediately activated. Despite the undeniable evidence of financial manipulation, he continued to believe that Brittany's intentions were good and that the problems were the result of misunderstandings rather than malicious deception. Brittany's response to the discovery of her financial crimes was swift and vicious. Rather than attempting to explain or apologize for her behavior, she immediately shifted into attack mode, blaming Derek for being controlling and financially abusive. She claimed that she had been forced to take on debt because Derek refused to support her career goals, and she characterized her secret spending as necessary for their survival. More disturbing was her escalation of the attacks on my mental state. She began documenting everything I said and did with obsessive detail, creating a narrative that portrayed me as an increasingly unstable threat to their marriage and safety. She took photographs of my house during visits, focusing on areas that might appear cluttered or disorganized to someone looking for evidence of cognitive decline. She also began reaching out to medical professionals and social services, expressing concern about my welfare and suggesting that I was living in unsafe conditions. Her approach was sophisticated and manipulative, presenting herself as a caring daughter-in-law who was worried about an elderly relative but didn't want to cause family conflict by intervening directly. "She's playing a very dangerous game," Susan warned me after learning about Brittany's contacts with adult protective services. "If she can convince even one professional that you're incompetent or unsafe, it could trigger an investigation that would be very difficult to fight, even with all our documentation." The third phase of our plan involved destroying Brittany's public persona and sources of income. Her influencer career depended entirely on maintaining the illusion of success and authenticity, and we began systematically exposing the artificial nature of her online presence. Anonymous social media accounts began questioning the sudden disappearance of her sponsorship deals and pointing out the obvious signs of purchased followers and fake engagement. Screenshots of her previous social media accounts under her real name were shared, showing a completely different persona that contradicted her current claims about her background and lifestyle. More effectively, we arranged for several of Brittany's previous victims to share their experiences through a private blog that detailed the pattern of her manipulative behavior. Martin Crawford, her ex-husband from Arizona, was particularly willing to document how she had nearly destroyed his relationship with his children while systematically draining his business accounts. "I want to save your son from what I went through," Martin told me during a long phone conversation that Susan had arranged. "This woman is a predator, and she won't stop until she's taken everything he has and destroyed everyone who cares about him." The impact on Brittany's online presence was immediate and devastating. Her follower count began dropping precipitously as people discovered the artificial nature of her platform. Brands that had considered working with her withdrew their offers after learning about the controversies surrounding her background. Her income, which had never been as substantial as she claimed, dried up completely. Brittany's desperation manifested in increasingly erratic and self-destructive behavior. She began posting long, rambling videos on social media claiming that she was being persecuted by jealous family members who couldn't accept her success. She made wild accusations about me stalking and harassing her, despite the fact that I had maintained complete distance from her since the Thanksgiving confrontation. Most dangerously, she began threatening to take Derek and leave Dallas entirely, claiming that my toxic influence made it impossible for them to build a life together in Texas. The threat was clearly designed to force Derek to choose between his wife and his family, but it also represented a potential escape route if her other manipulations failed. Derek's response to this ultimatum revealed the depth of Brittany's psychological control over him. Despite mounting evidence of her deception, despite financial ruin, despite the destruction of his relationship with his family, he began seriously considering relocating to another state where Brittany claimed she had business opportunities waiting. It was at this critical juncture that our most important evidence finally came to light. Susan's surveillance of Brittany's activities had captured something that would change everything: a recording of Brittany bragging to a friend about her successful manipulation of Derek and her plans for disposing of me as a threat to her control. In her own words, captured on audio that would stand up in court, Brittany revealed the calculated cruelty behind everything she had done to our family. The hair destruction, the financial manipulation, the isolation tactics, the attacks on my mental health, all of it had been planned and executed with the cold precision of someone who viewed human relationships as opportunities for exploitation. As Susan and I listened to that recording in the quiet of my kitchen, I felt the last vestiges of doubt and self-blame finally disappear. This wasn't about family conflict or personality differences. This was about a predator who had infiltrated my family with criminal intent, and now I had the evidence to prove it. The war was about to enter its final phase, and Brittany was about to discover that her carefully constructed house of lies was about to collapse around her. The recorded conversation that Susan had captured proved to be the keystone that brought down Brittany's entire edifice of deception. In her own voice, speaking to someone she believed was a trusted confidant, Brittany had revealed not only the calculated nature of her campaign against me but also her broader plans for exploiting Derek and eventually abandoning him once she had extracted maximum value from the relationship. "The old bitch actually thought I was going to make her look good," Brittany laughed on the recording, her voice filled with malicious amusement. "I've been planning that hair disaster for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to completely destroy her confidence. Derek doesn't even realize how easy it is to make him choose me over his family when I play the victim card." But the most damning part of the conversation came when Brittany discussed her financial strategies and exit plans. "I've got maybe 6 more months before Derek figures out how much debt I've put him in. By then, I'll have established residency in Nevada where the divorce laws are more favorable. He'll be stuck with all the credit card bills while I walk away with half of whatever assets his stupid mother hasn't already hidden from me. Susan and I had been listening to this recording for the third time when the front door opened and Derek walked into my kitchen without knocking. His appearance was shocking. He looked like he had aged years in the past few weeks, his usually meticulous grooming replaced by stubble and wrinkled clothing. His eyes were hollow with exhaustion and stress, and he moved with the defeated posture of someone who had finally begun to recognize the scope of his situation. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." The next hour was one of the most painful and cathartic conversations of my life. Derek sat at my kitchen table where I had served him breakfast countless times as a child, and for the first time in months, he really looked at me. He saw the wig covering my damaged hair, the strain in my face from months of psychological warfare, the evidence scattered across the table documenting his wife's crimes against our family. "I found more financial records," he told me, his hands shaking as he pulled documents from his briefcase. "She's been forging my signature on loan applications. There are credit cards I never knew existed. The mortgage on our apartment has been refinanced twice, and I never signed any of the paperwork." Susan gently played portions of the recorded conversation, and I watched Derek's face crumble as he heard his wife's true opinion of him and her detailed plans for his destruction. When Brittany's voice described him as pathetically grateful for any attention from a beautiful woman, and too weak to ever stand up to anyone, especially me, Derek put his head in his hands and wept. "How could I have been so stupid?" he asked through his tears. "How could I have chosen her over you? How could I have let her do this to our family?" The confrontation I had been dreading finally arrived when Brittany discovered Derek in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of her duplicity. She stormed into my house without invitation, her face twisted with rage as she realized that her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling faster than she could repair it. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "Derek, you promised me you wouldn't listen to your mother's crazy conspiracy theories. She's been stalking me and making up lies because she's jealous of our relationship." But Derek's transformation was complete. The broken man who had entered my kitchen emerged as someone stronger and clearer than he had been in years. "Stop lying, Brittany," he said with quiet finality. "I've heard the recording. I've seen the financial records. I know exactly who you are and what you've been doing to my family." Brittany's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath her manufactured warmth. "You're all going to regret this," she snarled, her beautiful face contorted with ugly hatred. "I'll destroy every one of you before I'm finished. That old witch won't live long enough to enjoy her victory." The threat against my life, spoken in front of witnesses and captured on Susan's recording device, provided the final piece of evidence needed for criminal prosecution. Derek immediately filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order, while Susan coordinated with local police to document the pattern of elder abuse, financial fraud, and criminal threats that Brittany had perpetrated. But Brittany's desperation made her increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. When she realized that her marriage was over and her crimes were about to be exposed, she began liquidating every asset she could access. Derek discovered that she had sold jewelry, electronics, and furniture from their apartment, converting everything to cash that she could transport easily. More disturbing was her attempt to destroy evidence of her other victims. Susan's contacts in law enforcement reported that Brittany had been making threatening phone calls to Martin Crawford and others who had spoken about their experiences with her. She was clearly preparing to flee, but she was also trying to ensure that no one would be able to testify against her if she was ever caught. The final confrontation came when Brittany attempted to gain access to my house while I was at a medical appointment. Mrs. Henderson called the police when she observed someone breaking into my back door, and officers arrived to find Brittany searching through my personal papers and attempting to access my computer. Her explanation to police was a masterpiece of manipulation that might have worked if officers hadn't already been briefed about her pattern of elder abuse. She claimed that Derek had asked her to check on me because the family was concerned about my mental state, and she presented forged documents suggesting that she had legal authority to act on my behalf. But the restraining order was already in place, and her unauthorized presence in my house constituted a clear violation. When officers searched her purse, they found copies of my personal documents, including bank statements and insurance policies that she had clearly been planning to use for identity theft or financial fraud. Brittany's arrest was swift and decisive, but her manipulation attempts continued even from jail. She placed tearful phone calls to Derek claiming that she was pregnant and that the stress of prosecution would endanger their unborn child. When that lie was exposed by medical examination, she shifted to claiming that I had threatened her and that she had only been trying to protect herself and Derek from my violent instability. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and her pattern of deception was too well documented to allow for successful manipulation of the legal system. Financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from previous victims, and photographic evidence of the damage she had done to my hair created an unshakable case for prosecution. Derek's law firm, which had initially been supportive during his family difficulties, distanced themselves quickly once the full scope of Brittany's criminal behavior became public. The partners made it clear that Derek's judgment and decision-making had been seriously compromised, and his career prospects suffered significantly as a result of his association with her crimes. But Derek accepted full responsibility for his role in enabling Brittany's abuse of our family. He liquidated his remaining assets to pay for the financial damage she had caused, and he dedicated himself to the long process of rebuilding trust with Emma, James, and me. The woman who had entered our family 2 years earlier claiming to bring love and happiness had been revealed as exactly what Susan had identified from the beginning: a predator who viewed human relationships as opportunities for exploitation and who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. As I sat in the courtroom watching Brittany led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit and her perfectly styled hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, I felt not triumph but profound sadness for all the damage she had done to people who had only wanted to love and trust her. The reckoning had come, but the healing would take much longer. The legal proceedings that followed Brittany's arrest unfolded with the methodical precision of a system designed to hold predators accountable for their crimes against vulnerable populations. District Attorney Helen Rodriguez, a woman I had known during her early career as a prosecutor focused on family crimes, took personal interest in ensuring that Brittany faced appropriate consequences for her systematic abuse of our family. Mrs. Thompson, what this woman did to you and your family represents exactly the kind of elder abuse that our office prioritizes, DA Rodriguez told me during our initial meeting. Her behavior demonstrates a clear pattern of targeting older adults for financial exploitation and psychological manipulation, and we intend to prosecute her to the fullest extent of the law. The charges against Brittany were extensive and serious: elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, stalking, harassment, and criminal threats. Each count carried significant potential jail time, and the evidence supporting prosecution was overwhelming. Susan's meticulous documentation, combined with testimony from Brittany's previous victims and the recorded conversations revealing her true motives, created a case that defense attorneys described as virtually unwinnable. Derek's cooperation with prosecutors was complete and heartbreaking to witness. My son, who had once defended Brittany's every action and dismissed my concerns as controlling interference, now provided detailed testimony about the manipulation tactics she had used to isolate him from his family and control his decision-making. She made me feel like I was protecting her from people who didn't understand her, Derek told the court during his testimony. Every time my mother expressed concern about our finances or our relationship, Brittany would cry and tell me that my family was trying to destroy our marriage because they thought she wasn't good enough for me. Derek's description of Brittany's psychological manipulation revealed the sophisticated nature of her emotional abuse. She had systematically undermined his confidence in his own judgment while positioning herself as the only person who truly understood and supported him. Every family gathering became an opportunity for her to collect perceived slights that she would later use to justify further isolation from his support system. She would take innocent comments and twist them into evidence that my family hated her, Derek continued. When my mother asked about our vacation expenses, Brittany convinced me it was because Mom thought she was a gold digger. When Emma suggested we slow down on wedding planning, Brittany said it was because Emma was jealous of her happiness. The financial impact of Brittany's crimes proved even more extensive than we had initially discovered. Forensic accountants working for the prosecution identified fraudulent transactions totaling nearly $200,000, money that Brittany had systematically stolen through forged signatures, unauthorized credit applications, and identity theft. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Brittany had been researching methods for declaring me legally incompetent while simultaneously working to isolate Derek from anyone who might question such proceedings. Documents found in her possession included templates for competency challenges and contact information for disreputable medical professionals who specialized in providing favorable assessments for a fee. Your daughter-in-law was planning to have you declared mentally incompetent so she could gain access to your assets through Derek's power of attorney, D.A. Rodriguez explained to me. The hair destruction was just the beginning of a comprehensive plan to portray you as confused and unstable. Martin Crawford, Brittany's previous victim from Arizona, traveled to Dallas to testify about his own experience with her manipulative tactics. His testimony provided crucial context for understanding Brittany's methods and motivations, revealing that her attack on me was part of a practiced pattern rather than an isolated incident of family conflict. She destroyed my relationship with my children by convincing me they were trying to take advantage of me financially, Martin told the court. By the time I realized what was happening, she had isolated me from everyone who could have helped me see the truth about what she was doing. Martin's testimony also revealed that Brittany had used similar tactics in other relationships, targeting vulnerable individuals and systematically destroying their support networks while draining their financial resources. The prosecution presented evidence of at least 4 previous victims, suggesting that Brittany's crimes against our family were part of a career built on exploitation and manipulation. The defense team's strategy was predictable but ineffective. They attempted to characterize Brittany as a victim of family discrimination who had been targeted because Derek's family couldn't accept his choice of wife. They claimed that the financial irregularities were misunderstandings rather than deliberate fraud, and they suggested that my accusations were the result of age-related confusion rather than legitimate concerns about criminal behavior. But the recorded conversations destroyed any possibility of portraying Brittany as an innocent victim. Her own words, spoken when she believed no one was listening, revealed the calculating nature of her actions and her complete lack of remorse for the damage she had inflicted on our family. When the defense played portions of the recording in an attempt to minimize their impact, Brittany's voice filled the courtroom with chilling clarity. Old people are so easy to manipulate because they're desperate to feel relevant and important. You just have to make them think they're protecting someone they love, and they'll do anything you want. The jury's deliberation lasted less than 4 hours, and their verdict was unanimous on all counts. As the guilty verdicts were read, Brittany showed no emotion beyond cold anger, her gaze fixed on me with undisguised hatred that revealed the truth beneath her carefully constructed facade. Judge Patricia Williams, known for her firm stance on crimes against vulnerable populations, sentenced Brittany to 8 years in prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The sentence also included full restitution to all victims and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with our family. Ms. Miller, your crimes represent a deliberate and systematic exploitation of people who trusted you and welcomed you into their families, Judge Williams said during sentencing. Your actions have caused immeasurable psychological and financial damage to multiple victims, and your complete lack of remorse suggests that you would continue this pattern of behavior if given the opportunity. Derek's professional consequences were significant but not career-ending. His law firm placed him on probation and required him to undergo counseling for manipulation victims, but they ultimately retained him as an associate with the understanding that his judgment had been severely compromised during his marriage. I'm grateful they're giving me a second chance, Derek told me after the sentencing. I know I have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust with everyone I hurt during this nightmare. The financial recovery was a long and complex process that required Derek to declare bankruptcy and start over completely. He moved back into my house temporarily while working to rebuild his credit and his savings, a humbling experience that forced him to confront the full scope of what his misplaced trust had cost him. But the most important recovery was the slow rebuilding of our family relationships. Derek's time living in my house gave us daily opportunities to have conversations that had been impossible during his marriage, discussions about trust, judgment, and the importance of maintaining connections with people who genuinely cared about his welfare. I'm sorry, Mom, Derek said one evening as we sat in the kitchen where so much of our recent trauma had unfolded. I'm sorry for choosing her over you. I'm sorry for letting her destroy your hair and your dignity. I'm sorry for being too weak to see what she was doing to all of us. The apology was important, but the daily evidence of Derek's commitment to change was more meaningful. He attended family counseling sessions with Emma, James, and me, working to understand how Brittany's manipulation had exploited his own insecurities and weaknesses. He volunteered with organizations that supported elder abuse victims, using his legal skills to help other families navigate the complex process of protecting vulnerable relatives from predators. Most significantly, Derek began to develop the backbone that Robert had always hoped our son would possess. The experience of being systematically manipulated and nearly destroyed had taught him to value honest relationships over comfortable lies, and to prioritize the welfare of people who genuinely cared about him over the approval of those who might exploit his need for validation. The reckoning had been painful and expensive, but it had ultimately revealed truths about our family that needed to be acknowledged and addressed. Brittany's crimes had exposed weaknesses in our relationships that predators could exploit, but they had also demonstrated the strength and resilience that emerged when we stood together against those who would harm us. As winter gave way to spring and the legal proceedings finally concluded, our family began the long process of healing from trauma while building stronger foundations for the future. The lessons we had learned about trust, judgment, and protection would serve us well in preventing future exploitation, and the bonds we had rebuilt through shared struggle were stronger than anything we had possessed before Brittany's brief but devastating presence in our lives. 6 months after Brittany's sentencing, I stood in my bathroom mirror examining my reflection with a sense of wonder and gratitude that still surprised me. My natural silver hair had grown back beautifully, healthier and more vibrant than it had been in years. The stylist I had chosen for its regrowth, recommended by Emma and carefully vetted for both skill and character, had shaped it into a modern but elegant style that honored my age while reflecting the strength I had discovered during my ordeal. "Your hair is absolutely gorgeous," Mrs. Thompson, Sarah, my new stylist, had told me during my most recent appointment. Whatever trauma it went through seems to have made it grow back stronger than ever. "I've never seen such beautiful natural silver on someone your age." The metaphor was not lost on me. Like my hair, I had emerged from Brittany's assault stronger and more resilient than before. The woman who had sat helplessly in her kitchen chair while someone destroyed her dignity was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and would never again allow others to diminish it for their convenience or profit. The family gathering for Emma's wedding had been everything I had hoped for and more. Emma looked radiant in her grandmother's restored wedding dress, which we had discovered in perfect condition in my attic, carefully preserved in tissue paper and cedar sachets that still carried the faint scent of my mother's perfume. The photos captured our family at its best, united, genuine, and glowing with the happiness that comes from relationships built on mutual respect and unconditional love. Derek, who served as one of Emma's groomsmen, had regained much of his natural confidence and warmth during the months of rebuilding our family connections. His work with elder abuse prevention organizations had given him a sense of purpose that transcended his legal career, and his commitment to protecting vulnerable people from predators like Brittany had become a driving force in his professional development. "I want to specialize in elder law," Derek told me as we danced together at Emma's reception. "I want to help families protect themselves from people like Brittany before they can cause the kind of damage we went through." James, now graduated and working as a social worker specializing in family crisis intervention, had found his own calling in helping people navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges that arise when family members exploit or abuse their relatives. His natural empathy, combined with his personal experience of nearly losing our family to manipulation, made him extraordinarily effective at helping others recognize and resist similar patterns of abuse. "What happened to us happens to more families than people realize," James explained during his wedding speech for Emma. "But watching Mom fight back and rebuild our family taught me that predators only win when good people give up. Our family is stronger now because we learned to recognize and resist manipulation instead of enabling it." The community response to our family's ordeal had been overwhelmingly supportive and had led to important changes in how elder abuse cases were identified and prosecuted in our area. DA Rodriguez had used Brittany's case as a model for training prosecutors and social workers about the sophisticated manipulation tactics used by financial predators who target families through romantic relationships. "Your courage in fighting back probably saved other families from going through what you experienced," D.A. Rodriguez told me during a community presentation about elder abuse prevention. Brittany's conviction sent a clear message that these crimes will be prosecuted aggressively, and it gave other victims the confidence to come forward with their own cases. Mrs. Henderson and my other neighbors had rallied around me during the worst of the crisis, providing practical support and emotional validation that helped me maintain perspective when Brittany's gaslighting tactics threatened to make me doubt my own perceptions. Their loyalty and friendship reminded me that genuine relationships are built over years of consistent kindness and mutual respect, not manufactured through manipulation and emotional exploitation. "We've known you for decades, Maggie," Mrs. Henderson told me during one of our regular coffee conversations. "That little witch might have fooled your son temporarily, but she never fooled anyone who really knew you. Your character speaks for itself." The legal settlement from Brittany's criminal conviction had provided full restitution for the financial damage she had caused, though the money was less important than the validation that our family's experience had been recognized as criminal rather than dismissed as a family squabble. Derek had used his portion of the settlement to establish a fund supporting legal advocacy for elder abuse victims, channeling his guilt and regret into constructive action that would benefit others. My own advocacy work with families experiencing similar crises had become deeply meaningful, providing purpose that transcended my personal healing while helping others navigate the complex emotions that arise when trusted family members enable abuse or exploitation. The combination of my professional background in education and my personal experience with manipulation had created unique insights that proved valuable in supporting other victims. "You understand what it feels like to have your own child choose an abuser over you," one woman told me during a support group meeting. "That's not something you can explain to someone who hasn't lived it." Having you validate that experience helped me stop blaming myself for what happened. The therapeutic work that our family had undertaken together had revealed important truths about the dynamics that had made us vulnerable to Brittany's manipulation. Derek's people-pleasing tendencies, inherited from his father but not balanced by Robert's underlying strength, had made him susceptible to exploitation by someone who understood how to weaponize his desire for approval. My own controlling tendencies, while well-intentioned, had created resentment that Brittany had been able to exploit and redirect against me. Learning to express concern and offer guidance without expecting automatic compliance had been a difficult but necessary adjustment in my relationships with my adult children. We're all responsible for creating the conditions that allowed Brittany to nearly destroy our family, our family therapist had explained during one of our sessions. But recognizing those vulnerabilities doesn't mean anyone deserved to be abused or manipulated. It means you can strengthen your relationships to prevent future exploitation. Emma's medical expertise had provided valuable insights into the psychological impact of long-term manipulation, helping Derek understand that his inability to recognize Brittany's true nature wasn't a character flaw but a predictable response to systematic emotional abuse. The knowledge that manipulation victims often develop trauma responses that make them more susceptible to further exploitation had motivated Derek's commitment to ongoing therapy and support group participation. The deeper wisdom that emerged from our family's ordeal was complex and sometimes painful to acknowledge. We had learned that love without boundaries enables abuse, that kindness without discernment invites exploitation, and that family loyalty must be balanced with honest assessment of individual behavior and character. Trust but verify had become our family motto, a principle that honored our desire to maintain loving relationships while acknowledging the reality that some people, including family members, might not have our best interests at heart. The balance between openness and protection required constant attention and adjustment, but it was far preferable to the naive vulnerability that had nearly destroyed us. As I sat in my garden on a beautiful spring morning, watching flowers bloom from soil that Brittany had once tried to poison with her manipulations, I reflected on the journey that had brought our family from the brink of destruction to a stronger foundation than we had ever possessed before. The hair that had been destroyed in malice had grown back more beautiful than ever. The relationships that had been poisoned with lies had been rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. The confidence that had been shattered through systematic abuse had been restored through the love and support of people who valued my authentic self rather than demanding my compliance with their expectations. The lesson that resonated most deeply was the understanding that dignity and self-respect are not gifts that others can give or take away. They are choices that each person must make for themselves every day. Brittany had tried to destroy my sense of worth by destroying my appearance and poisoning my relationships, but she had ultimately failed because she could not touch the core of who I was unless I allowed her to do so. The reckoning had taught me that sometimes the people closest to us can cause the deepest wounds, but it had also revealed that healing and redemption are possible when people choose courage over comfort and truth over convenience. Derek's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and commit to change had rebuilt our mother-son relationship on stronger foundations than ever before. The final wisdom was perhaps the most important, that true family relationships are characterized by protection and support rather than exploitation and control. People who genuinely love us seek to build us up rather than tear us down, to celebrate our strengths rather than exploit our weaknesses, and to honor our dignity rather than demand our submission. As I prepared for another family gathering in my dining room, setting the table with china that had witnessed both betrayal and reconciliation, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this place of authentic connection and mutual respect. The woman in the mirror, with her beautiful silver hair and hard-won wisdom, was someone I was proud to be. The hair had grown back, but more importantly, so had our family's understanding of what love really meant and what relationships truly required to flourish and endure. In the end, that knowledge was worth far more than anything Brittany had tried to steal from us, and it would protect us far better than anything we had possessed before we learned to value truth over harmony and character over convenience. Sometimes the most painful lessons are also the most valuable, and sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up teaching us exactly how strong we really are. What would you do if someone close to you betrayed your trust the way Brittany betrayed mine? Have you ever experienced manipulation in your own family relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, resilience, and finding strength in difficult times. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family dynamics. Remember that you deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care, not manipulation and control. Trust your instincts, protect your dignity, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is love. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the strength and wisdom to recognize and protect yourselves from those who would harm you. Until next time, keep standing strong and never forget your worth.